Well, hello, YouTube. Well, there's nobody in there yet, so let me get set up here, and we will start Slacking with Slacker Steve, new series where I get you guys warmed up before Adam gets over here. So let me share out some links, and then we'll get started, shall we? Uh-oh. We'll get started, shall we? That's me. No, shut up. I don't want to hear myself. All right. Okay. Post that shit here. And then come on, hurry the fuck up. Okay, so let's get started. So I have recently gone through the Next Generation for the billionth time. So yeah, I watched All Good Things again, and loved it back then, still love it now. And Q was a big part of that one, as he was a big part of Q. Now, a lot of times I see Q on a lot of lists like top 10 best villains or something like that. And is Q really a villain? I don't know if I'd really classify Q as a villain. If you think about Q, he definitely causes trouble, but it always seems to have some kind of point. Even going back to the first one, what is it? Encounter at Farpoint. So Q, he just seemed to be causing trouble for the Enterprise for no reason. Now, when that episode first aired, or the first time you see it, you don't have context on who Q is. You don't really know what his character actually is. So, of course, when you saw him back then, he came off as a villain. But if you kind of examine his intents behind that, I think, especially considering his relationship with Picard, I think he might have been either assigned or it was a personal project for him to improve on humanity. So when he first met them on Encounter at Farpoint, I don't think he was showing up just to be mean or to be a dick to the crew of the Enterprise. I think he wanted to assess humanity, and that's exactly what the trial is. They showed humanity's past sins with the the cartoonishly strange what did they call it? The European no, that's not it. Well, let's look it up here on this site that I recently discovered because I didn't know what the internet was before. Memory Alpha. So he traps him into that kind of cool looking gate thing, and he kind of mocks the crews by bringing up what Picard amusingly called costumes. It's back when we wore costumes like that, and I thought that was a really weird way to describe it. In any other parts of the world, is that normal for you to call somebody is this a costume? Am I wearing a costume? Well, kind of. But then when Picard makes his plea, he decides to give him a chance, and they kind of use the Farpoint mission as a basis. So he kind of comes off as a villain at first. So, and probably even more so in his second encounter. Let's talk about that actually. So the next one was Hyden Q, still in season 1, and he was trying to recruit Riker, to be part of the Q continuum. Now, well, again, it seemed to be kind of malicious. He had horrible pig creatures after all of the characters, and like or everybody came out unscathed, I should say. So, if was he being a villain in this episode? Like, does it vary from episode to episode? And I don't really think so, because there's some evidence to this where if he's interested in humanity, well, again, this is kind of another test. I mean, he wants to see what Riker does with the power that he gives to him. So, and it kind of starts to corrupt Riker. So maybe he probably failed that test, actually, because he started doing a lot of things, and then he gave up the powers ultimately. But if he could use it responsibly, wouldn't like he just hold on to the powers? Yeah, I think Riker totally failed that one, but ultimately, I think Q wasn't necessarily acting with villainous intentions in that one either. I think that was maybe another humanity test. Maybe gauge how far the Q continuum thinks that humanity has come. So let's move on to the next one, and the next one's a pretty big one. This is the first introduction to the Borg. Well, so again, Q seemed to be, how do I put this? He seemed to be like reveling in the fact that, well, no, let's put it this way. He did see how humanity could occasionally be arrogant, and he like pointed it out. So I think this was Q's way of knocking the human race down a couple points, and B, elaborate way to warn them the Borg were coming. I mean, if you think about the Borg, they're all the way out in the Delta Quadrant. So if they're out there, and the Enterprise was only, I mean, how many years was it? Let me see here. I don't have everything memorized. I think it was something like 12 years, I want to say. System J25, 7,000 light years. Doesn't say years, but probably a little over a decade for them to be getting back from this area. But we've established that like Voyager was about 70 years. I think by the time maybe they reached Borg space, I want to say maybe 50 years away. So the Borg were seemingly on their way already. So, and Voyager established that the Borg knew about humanity. So I think they were quite possibly on their way out to assimilate humanity, or at least start the scouting mission towards it. I mean, the one cube kind of fucked them up in a couple years. So But anyway, back to Q. In that episode, again, if you examine the exterior, he kind of looks like he's kind of being villainous. Like, I'm going to fling the Enterprise, and you have to deal with this Borg cube. But, like, two things happen. One, humanity uses their curiosity to check out the system. Q had kind of a stern warning to the Federation to not, mess with the Borg because they'll assimilate their technology. Now, at that point, they didn't seem all that interested in humanity. So, that was really the first taste. The second thing was when Picard had no other options, he asked Q for help. So, in his mind, he taught Picard, or maybe in his mind, he taught Picard a lesson that, if you need to ask for help from somebody, I guess we'll use the word superior. I don't really like using it in that context for the Q continuum, but we'll just say that for lack of a better word. Like, if there's somebody superior to you, don't be afraid to ask them for help. Don't let your pride get in the way of that. And maybe that's part of the reason, like, a race like the Q, or maybe even the Prophets, can survive corporeal form into that, is maybe humbling themselves a bit and not being arrogant, and knowing when something's too much for you. So again, I think for the most part he had heroic intentions. Maybe would that be a good word for it? Good intentions, at least. I think even though they did lose some crew members, which was very sad. But so all three of these so far, I wouldn't really call villainous. Some of it was, you probably wouldn't want to inflict that kind of harm on other living beings. Like maybe there's some ethical issues there, but I think, if you examine the intent, he didn't have bad intentions there. So let's continue, and let's not talk about all of this in detail. There were quite a few Q episodes, but he was pretty villainous in Cupid. I'll give him that. That just seemed to be like he thought he was paying Picard back, but he just kind of abducted them and put them in this weird, risky Robin Hood thing. So yeah, I wouldn't say that was like heroic. I mean, he acted like it at the end, but I think that was probably his most villainous moment. So moving on from that, see, True Q. True Q is kind of interesting because that wasn't the first interaction that we got from the Q Continuum. We saw the other Q in Deja Q, and it sounded like they had some sort of justice system, and that's why he ended up there. So the Q have a society, and that kind of shows here, but it kind of shows that the Q aren't, as a society, aren't as benevolent, I want to say, as Q that we know in all the episodes. At some point, they turn into that weird shadowy thing, and says, "Oh, we have to kill the girl," and he tries to put it off. He tries to save her. So I think it kind of shows he's a little restricted in some ways, and maybe that's why he originally got punished in Deja Q. Was because maybe he has more morals than maybe other Q do, and maybe that's why he's so interested in humanity. Maybe he doesn't know how to express those views. So moving further, Tapestry has been kind of called into question because, well, was it really Q? Was Picard hallucinating? I always maintain it was Q. It was him, talking to Picard as he's possibly dying to show Picard what kind of person he is. Now, that in some ways that doesn't seem like Q, but in other ways, like it's been shown that he can develop personal relationships, like he did with Vosh, and he did later with Janeway in a really, really kind of weird way. But I think, he thought of Picard as a friend, and Picard didn't, think the other way about him, is how I interpret it. Or, maybe, as Data put it, like his little pet. That's probably a pretty good way to put it. Like, he sees Picard like I see like a cat or a dog or something like that. But, maybe that was his way of comforting Picard. Maybe it was a little twisted, but, nobody's perfect. Again, in all these episodes, I wouldn't say villainous, kind of skirts onto maybe immoral, but it's clear he's acting towards some sort of allegiance to some kind of power, and he doesn't agree with them. And there's been episodes where Picard's had to do that. Like, remember the one where he had to take the Native Americans off the planet, and he didn't ultimately succeed. Like, it took Crusher starting a mutiny, kind of, for that to happen. Like, I think that's kind of analogous to Q and Picard and Tapestry. So then we wrap it up with all good things, and that I think that kind of implies that between season 1 and season 7, like that the entire series was Q's test, and that was the final test was them being shot around through the timelines, and he's helping them. That's the final test, and they passed, I want to say. I don't see Q too much in the other series. Well, so yeah, I think ultimately, I think of Q not as a villain or even an anti-hero. I do think of him as a good character, like, good, evil, maybe not like super good. And maybe, he did have some like really horrible things in his past. I mean, he's been called things like the god of lies and whatnot. So, yeah, I think in the end, Q is probably like a redeemed hero. Maybe this is kind of his like personal project to bring him around or something. So that's what I think. He was kind of a creep in Voyager. That was kind of weird, but I like those episodes, and that called into question his morals when it came to the other Q that wanted to die. So yeah, like I said, overall, I think Q was a hero. So what do you guys think? Um, there's nobody watching right now, but if you're watching this later, like, put down in the comments, like what is your take on Q? Did I get something wrong? Am I not looking into something right? Let me know. So next up, pretty soon, I think, in the next hour or so, Adam's going to join me. We're going to do an episode of Pop Goes the Show. I don't quite know what we're going to do yet, but yeah, if you're around in the next couple hours, stick around. And if you're watching this way later, it's probably up. So go check it out. All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Take it easy.